Hi, my name is Lawrence Paul Yaquillipton Letz-Lostleton. I'm an artist, a painter, performance artist, uh, virtual reality geek once in a while. But I'm just a creative person in the world of art. Okay, thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Paisley Smith. Thank you for having me on this panel. I'm non-Indigenous, and I've been working with Lawrence on Unceded Territories VR, which you can experience in the foyer of the Van City Theatre. I'm a filmmaker and director, and I've been working in virtual reality for the last 5 years. And I'm really excited to share Unceded Territories with you all.
Hi, my name's Leanne Ireland. I'm the Executive Director, CEO for the Urban Society for Aboriginal Youth. We create VR content for educational purposes, and we're featuring Thunder VR, which is a Blackfoot language learning program embedded in a traditional Indigenous story. We're located in Calgary, and we're really happy to be here.
Hi, my name's Casey Koizan. I'm Tlicho Dene from Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. I am a installation artist going through academia right now, doing my master's at the University of Manitoba in fine arts, self-taught VR artist, and currently working on a project with this guy.
My name is Travis Merkerty. I'm a Métis sound designer, producer, media artist from Yellowknife, Northwest Territories.
And just so a little bit, I am Loretta Todd. I'm Cree Métis. My family's from the St. Paul de Métis and Whitefish Lake First Nations, and also the Chippewa Turtle Mountain. And I'm a filmmaker primarily, but this VR thing has been haunting me for many years, going way back in the day in the 90s when we actually did something called Cybercom 4 up in Banff Center. And we had an event called From Drum Beats to Drum Bites, where we invited people like Buffy St. Marie, was doing Cradleboard and has been working on digital media for a long time, and other people who were working in this sphere. And we actually asked many artists to come and attend, and some said they didn't want any part of this, and others were ready to embrace it. So it's an honor to be part of this, what's happening again. We kind of put it aside, and now we're kind of back at it again, so I'm very excited to be here moderating this. So this isn't about me, it's about you guys. So, but I wanted to start with a question that's dear to my heart, and you can take it in any direction you would like, and I'll start from here and we'll work that way. The late Doreen Jensen, a Kitsan artist, was always fascinated by pop-up books as a child because she felt they were like how she experienced story by the storytellers in her community. She felt transported into the world they described, which she felt when she was reading pop-up books that came as close to being in that kind of immersive world that storytellers brought her into. So as an artist, she made a giant pop-up book in tribute to those memories, but mostly in honor to the storytellers. Is there a storyteller who inspired you from your life and influenced your work in VR?
John Romero, the Navajo game designer. I think Doom, as a kid, as a person that grew up playing games, playing Doom was like teleporting into another world. And I remember after it's a highly violent game, I remember after killing all the demons and then just exploring those spaces and being there, it seemed like the richest kind of spatial medium that something was just otherworldly to me. And so I remember being deep, playing those games was deeply influential for me, for sure.
Cool.
From our territory, I'll have to give a shout out to George Blondin, who kind of recites a lot of stories from throughout the culture of the Denende, talking about stories of like medicine people and hunters and the spirituality and how he incorporates like animals into the mix and all of the stories that have been passed down through generations.
For me, there's no particular storyteller that speaks to me. As Indigenous people, our culture is very much part of an oral tradition and part of storytelling. And I find that when you're in a room with an elder or a community leader, they often tell a story that is compelling or provides teachings to where you're at that point in your life. And so no one particular storyteller sticks out in my mind, but that everyone has had an impact at a critical time in my life that's led me in a certain way, and with their stories and teachings and learnings. And I think that's kind of part of Indigenous worldview in general.
It's funny. I was just thinking the same thing. Like, for me, storytelling is very much a part of our family. And my grandmother wrote a book about her childhood in the partition of India and Pakistan. And a lot of those stories are passed down through her just telling those real stories, but then also like just complete fictions that she would tell. And I think that's, you know, kind of sparked an interest in an imagination and envisioning these other worlds and what those would be like. So family for me is those storytellers.
The work that I've been involved in over the years, I did some work in the Banff Center, Inherent Rights, Vision Rights, in 1992, 1990. So I've been working in creating virtual worlds. Inherent Rights, Vision Rights is about my being as a person on this planet. Do we have inherent rights? Under the Indian Act in this country, am I a citizen of this country? So these things have to be resolved as a person, my personal being. So I've always been interested in looking at the realities and the dualities of what is unceded territories. When the colonialists want to build a pipeline within our traditional territories without our consent. So it is political. So it's not my fault that this world is doing what it's doing. I didn't create global warming, but I still have to look after my heritage, whatever happens to me or our people. I went to residential school. I lost my language. That's why I can speak to you within this language. Because I don't have my language, because I was the consequences of that genocide. This country is based on its genocide. This is an apartheid country. So I make work that is political and directly deals with the realities of Aboriginal people. So and I enjoy doing it, and I keep saying it. Thank you.
Well, I was going to ask you a question because you and I, back in the day when you did that first VR, I wrote a little bit about that VR. And I remember you talking about that you insisted that the laws of nature apply, that in VR, in the experience of VR, you had to feel the ground, you had to go through a door. There was no kind of defying the laws of nature. And I found that really fascinating because, of course, at the time, everybody was flying in VR and, you know, there's all this sort of stuff. I'm just wondering about the kind of indigenous science or indigenous, ideas of time and place and space that you're working with now with Paisley and this new work.
We look at it as everything is sacred, so it's, to me, to honoring or looking at being in a virtual space to understand what it is to. I love my land. I love my motherland. I may not like your Canadian flag. I may not like your British Columbia and your Queen and your royal family, but I do love my motherland. And so I wanted people to be grounded on what it is to love this land, what my teachings were and philosophies of the land. You know, so it's all I have. And we've been displaced to colonial reservations, which are some of the oldest concentration camps in the world. So I am your enemy. We've always been your enemy. You've been always exterminating us. This is the purpose of colonialism, capitalism, globalization. Push us aside. Missing and murdered. All of those things. The whole process of this world. We've survived all of those things. And so my work is, it's a truth to record. I'm more of a history artist. Is that's reality. I did a painting titled Red Man Watching White Man Trying to Fix Big Hole in the Sky. I didn't make that hole in the sky, but you had to fix it, and you're still trying to fix it. This is why I'm trying to teach people how to love this land. And how do you fix something that's broken? So virtual realities are, can we think about all of these things? So it's a very interesting time to be in as an artist. I'm more of a world artist, and I have to talk to the world because these things come down to emancipate me, emancipate all Indian people from the Indian Act. Give me freedom, give me citizenship, give me equality.
So
These are the things that we're looking at and working on.
exactly. One of the things I was going to add to your question, Loretta, for me, I was working in virtual reality as an artist, directing projects, and my previous project was called Homestay. It was produced by the National Film Board of Canada. It's about a suicide that occurred in my family. And when I was researching that film, this ties into what Lawrence is talking about. Just 1 second, bear with me. So when I was working on that project, it was obviously really painful, and it was about understanding grief, and added to that was the layer of exploring new technology and trying to figure out how to best tell this story, this personal story in technology. One of the things I'd heard was that the early 80s and 90s VR work was a time of artists creating and experimenting with technology in a very freeing and what sounded to me very fun way. And so one of the things that I did was I started to look up texts from the 90s and started buying them on eBay for like inspiration. And when I was reading that, I'd never drawn the connection that Lawrence had made a pioneering work of virtual reality. But it was really funny because we already knew each other, but when I was reading the book, I was so surprised that Lawrence had made this piece, Inherent Rights, Vision Rights, which as a non-Indigenous person, it is a very profound piece and an extremely generous act on Lawrence's part to share the sacred realm of the Longhouse with audiences, especially given the context of oppression using technology on First Nations and Indigenous people in Canada. So basically after that, Lawrence and I just decided that we would work together. I have the last 5 years in the current like renaissance of VR experience with like Unity and Oculus and all this stuff. So we decided to, use our shared experiences to build unceded territories.
Cool. Well, that kind of brings up something that I kind of talked a little bit about in my presentation, this idea of how we draw from, our experience in our relationships to land and territory and knowledge systems, including things like love and the values that, we live by as Indigenous people. So my question, I guess, if we move down here, how does your relationship to your territory, your cultural knowledge systems, your protocol influence your work? I mean, it can be in terms of content, it can be in terms of how you form, it could be in terms of how you work, the relationships, the people you work with. Like, how does that influence those decisions? You guys have obviously built a really good working relationship to be able to achieve that and have a merging of minds. So maybe we can start with you and you can answer some of that.
Sure, yeah. So One of the so the inspiration behind Thunder was we had a graphic novel that we worked with an elder to create with the intention of language learning, Blackfoot language learning, and also telling a traditional Indigenous story. And that graphic novel was wildly popular in terms of a learning educational tool. And then, weird twist of events, we took kids as a reward for doing well in school. I work for a charity, I'm not a tech company, obviously. We took kids to a VRcade because they had done well in school, and they were obsessed with it. And one of the kids said, we should have an Indigenous VR game. And I was like, well, that's not a bad idea. But what does that look like? What does an Indigenous VR game look like? And there's kind of this idea that when you include tech and remove, say, land-based activities or cultural activities, that you're somehow not being Indigenous, or that those tools are somewhat against kind of traditional values. And I thought, well, kids are engaging with VR and they're engaging with traditional stories. Could we use that as an effective tool without being kind of de-indigenizing those stories? And so what we did was we reached out to Mammoth, which is our XR creator, and we said, will you help us create the gaming process, the VR process, but are you willing to include a very Indigenous approach to how it will look, how it will sound? Can we bring youth and elders and community members to you guys and get them to say what they want things to look and be and sound like? And they were very open to that. And so we had, blessing ceremonies and closing prayers, and we had this very iterative, cyclical approach to how we did it, which I think very much aligned with our cultural protocols and practices. So I think there is a way to embed kind of cultural protocol and practice into VR game creation and make it truly authentic to Indigenous voice.
Nice. My turn? Okay. So I was introduced to VR about 2 years ago. A local organization called Western Arctic Moving Pictures had a VR setup, an HTC Vive, and they kind of suggested that I get into it. And I saw this game called Superhot be in development for a while. Anyone play Superhot before? Okay, yeah. It's fun, eh? It's really fun. So after I spent about 100 hours in Superhot, I was introduced to this program called Tilt Brush. So almost immediately when I started using Tilt Brush, I started kind of drawing from a lot of the stories and legends and myths of the North. So started making basically animals. One of my first creations was basically called Raven Gods, and it's basically like a giant raven with like a council of gigantic ravens, even bigger than him in the sky, that are kind of just like, protecting or like looking over us, and then drawing from other kind of stories like the giant beavers that used to roam the north. So we started creating like beavers, and another creation is like something that's very real. When you're driving around in the Northwest Territories, there's, especially like in the kind of southern sort of regions, there's a lot of bison that are just like walking around. And something that happens almost every time you drive to Travis's hometown of Fort Smith, there's these giant bison that are on the highway and they won't let you pass. It's like they're just there.
You got to get permission.
Yeah, you got to get permission from these guys. So it's like that was one of the inspirations behind the works that I was creating, was this giant bison in the middle of the road, and it's just looking at you.
It's called buffalo eye. That's the
Buffalo eyes. Yeah, their eyes are just like going out like that, but they're looking right at you. So that has a really big influence on the work that I do, and I haven't really delved away from that at all. And that's kind of what started the collaboration between Travis and I, was after making about 3 or 4 of these animals, models, that sort of thing. There was this plugin that popped up online called Fusion. and it enables people to, numerous people to work on the same project file at the same time. And I sent it to Travis, just like, check this out. And he was like, oh, cool. But, like, why are you sending this to me? And I was like, I don't know, I think it's cool. You know, he's like, so do you want to work on something? You know, it's like, yeah, well, I have these models, I have this idea. So it's something that we were both kind of like resonant with. And that's kind of what started the idea and the project to begin with. So land and culture and our stories and legends influence my work the most.
Well, for me, it was there's always this comment level that it's like, if you want, like, when it comes to Indigenous languages, like, if you want to learn the language, you got to be on the land. And I was like, well, that kind of sucks for a lot of these kids that can't get on the land. Their parents are not capable of doing that. They don't feel capacity. So they're essentially losing their culture because they are losing this relationship with the land. And I was like, well, what are ways that we can be on the land, maybe, and simulate that experience? If that's the book, that's the medium itself that this information lives inside, then is there a way that we could create that spatial relationship and that understanding of the world? I think VR, and been talking lots about VR the last couple of days with people, and it's like, we don't even need to decolonize VR. It's like, it's not even been colonized yet. We're just the spaceship is just taking off. You know, there's no one already there. In some sense, we can land and create a world that represents our values and the way we see the world. And so this lens this perspective that we can have, I think that we can look at that environment as we can see the poetry of that environment and what it's trying to tell us. And so part of what me and Casey are doing is, like, I always think back in the Northwest Territories when I'm like in the winter there and it's like -40. I'm like, wow, man, it must have been hard. You know, like, it must have been hard to be here. It's like -40, you know, cutting your own wood. There's one great story where, like, one elder, he was bootlegging, got sent to jail. This is a story from one of our elders there, and he's like, you know, we didn't want him to go, and then he went, and then he came back, and they're like, well, you know, he was kind of shameful for this elder to be in jail for this thing. And then he's like, oh, it was the best time of my life. He's like, 3 square meals a day, heated room. I didn't have to cut my own wood. I didn't have to heat my tent with, you know, I didn't have to melt water from the lake that I chipped myself. He's like, these people have a different form of punishment. You know, it's like, that's not, you know, that's not. So there's a whole deep experience that's there that conveys this sense of vulnerability that you have to come to terms with. And my interest in games is, like, Doom is my sort of formative spatial game experience, and that is a massive power fantasy. You got a shotgun and you're just killing demons from hell. Like, you know, you are taking over that world, one man, and, you know, doing this thing. And I found that what really has been my maturation in sort of game playing was when the gun got taken away in first-person games, and you just talked to people, and you went to places and you listened, you know. Instead of being this thing that's, like, always right at the bottom of your eyes as this gun, it was actually that you just were there and that you experienced something, and you had to. The game was only finished. A game was always unfinished unless you gave a shit, you know, unless you cared about what was going on. I think that's kind of what the VR experience is. It's an unfinished experience unless someone plays it, and the emotions that you feel and what the values that you take from it, that completes the game. And so I think that, you know, with Sea Visions, we wanted to sort of have you encounter animals in a vulnerable state on the land when you were either hungry or they seem like they're powerful. They navigate this place. You know, the bison in the winter looks real warm, actually. He's got a lot of fur. And then you're, like, dying, you know? So it's that kind of, like, you respect that world. You are a co-inhabitant of that land, and you share that space with the ravens that never leave in the winter. You know, like, they tried to cull the ravens in Yellowknife one time. They were like, call the seagulls. Yeah, it's fine. Get rid of them. It was because it was bothering the airport. And they're like, call the ravens. And they're like, well, what are you talking about? Yeah, it's like, they're our friends. They stay here with us, you know, like, these are, you know, you are not going to kill ravens, you know? And so I kind of like that idea that's how we code in that information into what sort of we're hoping to create in Sea Visions is this sense of a relationship where it's not about invulnerability. It's not a power fantasy. It's a relationship that you have with the space that you're in.
I mean, I think that kind of speaks to this idea that I hopefully presented a little bit earlier today, this idea that we already experience the immersive. The technology has just caught up with us. Mm-hmm. It's always been that for us in terms of dream, in terms of ceremony, in terms of, you know, just our relationships to animals, that when we're encountering animals, whether it's in a VR game or just on the land, that we are having a relationship with them, right? And we have to be conscious of that. And so I think it's interesting how that's why I feel that we really are kind of, there's no learning curve for us other than getting access to the technology and the venture capitalists and the supporters of our projects. So that's all we need. That's all we need. That's all we need. We don't need anything else. We're there already, which leads to this. So we're kind of like we're really lucky because we work with some great people like Casey, who came and did some presentations with us, and also Moni Gar and Michael Running Wolf and Caroline Old Coyote, who have come in, and there's a lot of other Indigenous people who have been working in this field, who bring they're very much immersed in that, and they're already, and Moni talks about coding in Cree, in Mohawk, and Cheryl Arundel has also coded in Cree, and Moni talks about bringing haiku into her coding, and also kind of creating these sort of surprises or that come directly out of her cultural experience. So how do you think, as Indigenous people, we can kind of influence, where do you think we'll be going in terms of programming and even transforming in technology, including the hardware and the software? Like, those are the kinds of, I really think that, when Leroy Little Bear was working with quantum physicists and brought elders together with quantum physicists, he did that to say, gee, quantum physicists have run out of ideas to think about time and space. So we already have these great concepts of time and space, or beyond concepts of time and space. How can they influence the kind of technical innovation and narrative innovation and other kind of even, the hardware innovation within VR and AR and XR? So we could start here and go back that way again.
I think that with VR, like I see it as like a shamanistic device, like it's an experiential thing. You receive information in different ways. Like one of the things I found most profound in VR was eye contact. I thought that was like I could not shut off the fact that I felt like someone was there, and I thought like that to me was the most compelling part of it, and I think that we have a platform that really does convey dreams. We've done experimental media that, over the years that is still a screen-based thing. And I think VR is screen-based, but it's communicating the sensation of space, the sensation of distance and presence, and your body can't shut that off. Cyber sickness is the fact that you can't shut that off. And so maybe we can get trained and acclimatized to it. I always refer to like the Formula One game where Sony makes this Formula One game and everyone that plays it just gets sick because it's like, you're not a Formula One driver. That's hard. Like driving that fast, every part of your body tells you to stop. It's like, that means that, what you think you can embody on a screen, you actually kind of can't embody. Like there's degrees of violence that you could do on a screen in games. Gamer, played a lot of shooting games. But when you do that, I find when you do that in VR, there is a sensation of like, I'm gonna stop. Like, do I gotta do this? Like, what's going on? I'm trapped in this moment of like, can I just be here and meet these people and just see this space? So we're communicating in a language I think is different, and so I think that we can come into this space with a different sense of like a power fantasy, of violence. The male violent power fantasy is the thing that's really dominated games, like at least for me growing up. It's part of the media that I consumed. I think that this space is a place where we can just be there and just listen and see other people and sense that they're there, and not just use it as a place to kind of like, stroke an ego, hide from our vulnerabilities. We can't really hide there. So maybe that to me is that's a part of it, I guess.
From what I've seen so far within Indigenous VR primarily, it's really exciting. Like I really enjoy how Indigenous VR artists are creating and programming, like Lawrence's work there and a few other creations that are kind of happening. And I think that one of the strongest things for Indigenous VR is being able to immerse people within the stories that we're creating. Because throughout history, like stories have been like orally translated. They've been written down. They've been drawn out as drawings and paintings and films and plays. Where the difference with VR is you're able to put the person right in the middle of the story. They're able to actually feel it. They're able to sense it and get a different kind of like perception of history, of culture. And it's just really exciting to be part of it, I guess, albeit kind of slowly. But I think it's a very effective medium. And one thing that's always been in the back of my mind as I was creating what I'm creating and like taking from Den and Day legends and stories and stuff like that is like, what are our elders gonna think? What are our elders gonna think about this, right? And it's always kind of,
Or how do we explain this to our elders?
Yeah.
That question comes up and like, just don't. This one doesn't. Just let this one slide.
yeah, and it's I've always kind of like okay, like what's gonna happen when an elder sees this? And last year or something like that, WOMP was up in a community in the Northwest Territories named Delaney. It's this small kind of community. And our buddy Davis, who works with WOMP, sent me a message. He's like, hey man, like, can I show some elders your creations? I was like, yeah, sure. Just let me know like what is said or like what they think. And what he told me was an elder put on the headset and they showed them raven gods, and they were kind of like looking around and stuff, and they took off the headset and they said, you know, I didn't really think much of VR, but if stuff like this is being made, then it's okay with me. You know? And that was like my blessing. It's like, sweet. It's like, I don't need permission from anyone else. Like, if I got permission from the elders, it's like good to go.
Hit the gas.
You know? Yeah. So yeah, I think like it's just a really strong medium, and I'm really excited to see where it goes from here, and all of the new technology that's kind of created from an Indigenous perspective, or some of the ideas that are going to come to fruition in the future.
I can't really speak so much to like hardware and programming because that's not what I do. But one of the things that I've said to people that ask me about VR is that I feel like it aligns. It's like a new frontier. It aligns very well with Indigenous storytelling naturally. We don't tell linear stories. We tell these cyclical, kind of non-ending. You have to immerse yourself to find the lesson, to find the teaching, to find what's meaningful to you in those stories. And that's how elders convey those teachings to you. And so VR has a really interesting way of being able to tell stories in that way. You can tell these kind of open, free world gaming puzzle, kind of like this seamless transition between storytelling, interaction, choice, ending, non-endings. So VR really aligns really well with how we want to tell Indigenous stories, at least how we want to tell Indigenous stories. And then on the hardware front, we've actually thought about like how do we transform headsets so people are wearing something that doesn't necessarily look like a headset. And we've often talked about like, can we get Indigenous artists to paint on the headsets, or can we add some sort of way to transform kind of being in this immersive experience that's like more in line with like traditional masks or different things like that. So actually thinking about not only what people are doing in the headset, but how people are perceiving the person in that headset. And so we've had conversations like that. But I think for me, I think that there's like this really interesting time in VR where it feels really accessible to Indigenous storytelling. And that's kind of exciting and compelling and interesting.
So Lawrence and I tried to make a mask that goes on top of the Oculus headset, and actually, if you go see our piece, we have a a mask that we built that goes on top. So you actually embody one of the characters that's in Lawrence's painting. Is called the Super Predator, who's like the evil oil baron who's destroying the earth, and so you actually wear the mask of that character and have the hands of this character as you move through the world. And just to add to what you were describing, like the thing that I think is the most exciting thing about virtual worlds and exploring them is the element of emotion that's created through touch and through exploring space. Like it almost feels like you are in the real world, you just happen to be in a different place. And that's the thing that Lawrence and I decided we would play with in unceded territories. Kind of what you were saying earlier about how like it feels like it's a space that hasn't been colonized yet. We kind of have a totally different approach where we're like, can we use virtual reality, which, you know, is a technology that is, you know, expensive and all these things come together to make this product. Can we use it to challenge people to think about their lives outside of the headset? So in the project, you are this evil character, but you don't realize you are till the end. So even if you don't want to destroy the earth, you are. So you're forced to look at your own, the way that you move through the earth, and whether you like it or not, you're a part of climate change and colonization. So to use these, the interaction, like how you move through space, how you touch it, as like, in our experience, you throw paint to reveal this world. And so that's kind of an aggressive act, but it feels so delightful and fun when you're in it. But then to think about those actions after the experience and think about how they, what they mean and what that means, like how you move through the world normally. Like, you might not think it's aggressive, but what does it do? So anyways, I'll let Lawrence take the rest of that.
The idea of virtual reality and creating art, it is a weapon. It came from NASA, was released to the world, and we were asked to do something different with it. How do you create in the fear of others? I don't want you to fear me anymore. And so you will understand me, that I'm not a Christian. I'm not going to go to your church, and all of these things, these indifferences that they have, this fear. Then I don't like the color of your skin. Then I don't like the turban you're wearing. All of these things become a part of the humanities that we live in, and it's chaos. And so I thought I would let people understand, when you outlawed our culture and outlawed our longhouses, we went into these secret worlds and these secret societies and hid everything from you because we weren't allowed to have it because we were put in jail for it. So we hid all these things, but it was time for change. And I met a lot of natives, and I looked at a lot of things, and I said, well, maybe it's time that we teach the world these things about the world, that everything is sacred and they all have their place. And we have to share this world. And so I started to create virtualness of virtual identities so that you will understand and you won't have the fear of me and the color of my skin and the feeling and the love that I have for the land and all the creatures that walk with it. An ant has sovereignty. A bear has sovereignty. My swimming brother has the right to be here. And so I wanted, what is that virtual fly that we take? What does that be? All of those things that I created in virtual reality was to give you an experience of life. And so it's an interesting way to communicate, and it gives me the opportunity to share, so that people will travel through these spaces and understand what it is to be a Native person and be different from this world in ways that philosophies and life and that we have, that we've been taught, that trees are sacred. And so it's an interest to me. It's the process of the art is like walking through one of my paintings, and to visually experience that. The thing about VR work is that you have to share your intellectual knowledge and skills with other people so that you can create something. You're not standing alone. You culturally work together. And that's what we're doing, is that we've set aside our differences. I can get along. And that's what I learned from the first virtual reality project at the Banff Center and the world stage, that it's a multitude of people. It's not just one cultural aspect. You have technicians from different cultures that are helping you to facilitate how to create the creative process that you're working with. I never even had a computer when they brought me to the BAM Center. Didn't own one. And they asked me, well, why am I even here? I said, well, your work just adds to it. We understand what you're doing. We see what you're doing. You can do something with this. And I'm sitting there looking at it for the longest time. So that was my first encounter with. I was asked from the world to create virtualness. And so I presented to the world these things that I make for the world. So it's kind of fun and exciting, and I've always enjoyed it. I mean, we've gone a long ways from Pong.
Well, one of the things that we talked about when we were making Unceded Territories is the fact that 20 years have passed since that first piece. And so do you want to just talk about like how we tried to make this one a totally different approach than the first one?
There's the two differences where one was in a space of embracing culture and tradition and seeing it in a native perspective. The other one is from a world perspective where people come into the environment and just destroy it. Just beautiful. It's like supernatural British Columbia is one giant clear cut. If you truly want to see British Columbia for what it is, you just have to fly over it. So you can't hide anymore. So this piece was designed for why embrace the 1% and let them have the dignity of destroying this world when you can do it yourself in a couple of minutes and enjoy being the destroyer yourself, so that you can have a taste of what it's like to be that super predator of the world that you truly are. Why wait? Why not imagine that, well, I'm not going to be here in 200 years because global warming is going to destroy everything. Well, you don't have to wait. I've created a piece for you so that you get to destroy it right now. You know, just no more waiting. It's in your hands. You get to feel this thirst, this killing, destruction, destroy, kill it all, kill the planet. Right now, I want to, as we sit them on reservations and they get the luxury of watching us destroy our homelands, we get to see everything. Polly Lake, the salmon. Since contact, we've gone from 600 million salmon to 40 million. What is your purpose? As humans, you're here to kill everything. There's no salvation. I'm not here for you're not here for salvation. This is British Columbia. This is a colony of the British Empire. For your queen, in the namesake of your queen, you're here to choke, keep your hands on my throat so that I can barely breathe, and let me watch, stand there and let me kill it in front of you, because I have the RCMP, I have the Canadian Army, I have all the power in the world, and you take it. That's what it's about. It's about what it feels like to be me, to stand there. What it looks like. It's not pretty. It's not a beautiful feeling. I want you to see what you're doing.
So can I I kind of think we have to wrap up really quick, and I know people have a few questions, but, so, you know, you have dedicated, your work is all about, you have immersed yourself, that's your, you know, shamanistic power, you know, as you take us to the land of the dead, if you like, right? You know, I mean, and that's a really powerful thing to do. And one of the things that's also kind of interesting is this idea of cognitive change. Like, and is it possible for that kind of cognitive change? I mean, I'm not convinced of the empathy of VR, that, you know, people just have to see refugee camps and then they'll go, oh, let's help the refugees. So far that hasn't really worked. But, you know, there is that transformation really going to come about through cognizant change? And certainly our elders say learn the language, you know, learn the language and then have the language, you know, be embedded in the VR, because that's what's going to create that cognitive change. And they even call out to non-Indigenous people to learn the languages, because when you learn the Indigenous language, you will start to change cognitively in how you look at the world and how you see it. Just don't become better. That's the only problem. Sometimes these earnest non-native people become better at our languages because you have more privilege and access. But, you know, that doesn't discourage you from learning a language. But I guess the question to all of you is it possible? Is if taking, you know, all these people by trickster, by trickster, right? Because you think you're good, but you find you're bad. Is it possible that taking people into these realms, can we create cognitive change to those people who are basically our, you know, they are basically our annihilators. You know, they are out to destroy the land and the resources. Is it possible VR has that capacity?
It's an exercise of our will to create, and I think that an artist, we're here to enlighten, to entertain you, to make you happy, to make you cry, to make you think, to embrace good and evil and everything. So it's not as though we're not trying to communicate, or we're there to share everything, our lives, what we've experienced. That's art. I mean,
Yeah.
it's pure. We're there to
Yeah.
give you everything.
Casey, do you have something to say?
Yeah, from like just working in VR and experiencing some of the other things that are being created, I find that one thing in particular that VR really amplifies is vulnerability. And you put on the headset and it's like, you don't know what's going to happen, right? And with VR being like another learning tool, it enables the viewer or the participant to be extremely vulnerable to whatever kind of content they're absorbing, I guess you can say. So when you're within this environment, it seems like you're more susceptible to understanding and to acquire more of a appreciation or just kind of like how things are through someone else's eyes. You know, if that's the kind of situation that is being created, is if it's engineered to be this type of person or this kind of setting, that you are living that. You're being immersed within this environment, and that is your life for the time being that you have that headset on. So I think it's very effective.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because this idea of vulnerability, in fact, without giving things away, often in ceremony, you go into a vulnerable place in a way, right? And you have to trust in the cosmos and the people who are there with you. So it definitely creates a different kind of relationship and dynamic, and builds on those values that we share as, you know, love and trust and so on. So maybe there is something that really can help engage with this kind of communication beyond, within our communities and beyond. So you wanted to add something, and I think then we'll have to wrap up.
Yeah, I think one of the things we found is that we have to talk elders into headsets. we're like that. Well, one of the sad parts of VR's history was as a way to prank the elderly. I was probably guilty of doing it. My mom, though, she had nerves of steel. So, but like that was like, we have a project right now, and it's like, how's the exhibition going? It's like, oh, well, usually it's like before they'll watch anything, it's like a sit down, like it's going to be okay, it's all good, and to get people to check out these devices. The project we worked on called Northern Sites with West Nordic Moving Pictures, I did sound design of that, and so we're bringing that around small communities. Davis Heslip and Pablo's there. And Davis sort of gave us feedback on that experience, that it's like very often you have to sit down and talk to a person and tell them like what's going to happen and before they'll get into it. But that vulnerability there, that trust has to be built. But the interesting thing is that people have really strong emotional reactions to VR. One of the ones we had is a carver on the ice outside of Inuvik, so on the Arctic Ocean, and he carves a big polar bear out of snow, and it's sort of like him describing that experience and why he was making it. That actually made a lot of people cry. A lot of elders cry. They'd never, because it's like how homebound they are, that experience of being somewhere to them felt so like, that was something really needed. And when they saw it, they would like pull it off and actually start crying. And so I think that, like, especially for like access, people that don't have the capacity to go on the land, you see it actually really make a difference. And so that's sort of, I think it's more than arguing for it. By example, we've seen people have very strong emotional reactions to VR. So.
Cool. Now, I don't know, do we have time for questions, or were you kind of wrapped up? I don't know. We're wrapped up? We're wrapped up. Okay.
Oh, okay.
All right, well, you can ask them questions after. They're all really brilliant, and they're all really willing and able to talk with you. Yeah. And so thank you very much for being here and listening, and really appreciate it. And thank you to all the panelists. Amazing job.
Merci, Joe.
So.